I suppose you're all wondering why I called you here today. I'd like to take some time to talk about what I consider to be a very underrated children's book, The 11th Hour, A Curious Mystery by Graham Base, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, which is effectively an Agatha Christie style mystery with talking animals. On the surface, this might seem like a typical light read you might find in the children's section of a local library, and it basically is. But what's very interesting about this book, and why I consider it underrated, is because you could read this book from cover to cover and only ever get half of the story. Because there's a lot more about this curious mystery that it talks about, which is beneath the surface. And kind of read between the lines of the text. I first came across this book when I was about 8 years old. And when I sort of discovered all the kind of mysteries and puzzles behind the surface level reading, it blew my mind. And that's chiefly the reason why I've always been particularly interested in mystery stories, detective fiction, and those kind of genre fiction ever since. Like, typical Agatha Christie murder mysteries, all the way down to the modern internet ARGs, which is a kind of mystery story itself. But anyway. So first, a little bit about the author. These trivial facts don't necessarily matter to the point that I'm talking about, but it's the kind of thing that you typically bring up in this kind of presentation. So he was born in 1958 in the United Kingdom and moved to Australia at a young age. He produces and has his own children's books, so he's both the writer and illustrator, and he still makes them today because he's still alive in Australia. He's most famous for writing the book Animalia in 1986, which you see is kind of advertised at the bottom of the 11th Hour here. It says by the same author as Animalia. I don't know why. I've never really read that book. I don't know why that's his most famous, but it is. But he made the 11th Hour in 1989. Again, both wrote and illustrated it. And he's the winner of the 2007 Speech Pathology Book of the Year Award. So, and for the book itself, as I said, it was published in 1989, sold 2 million copies worldwide, so pretty good. Won the Picture Book of the Year Award by the Children's Book Council of Australia in the year that was published in 1989. It was re-released a few years later, 1993, with the puzzle solutions included. And basically, Base was inspired from reading Agatha Christie novels, so from like classic works of detective fiction from like the early 20th century. And also, he gathered inspiration for the images of the animals from when he visited Kenya in 1987, so saw a lot of like the wild animals in the Serengeti. It's 30 pages long, so, pretty short, as you would expect from a children's book, fully illustrated, and it's written entirely in rhymes. So, pretty entertaining. So now, let's get to what does the actual text of the story says. So our story is about Horace the elephant. And Horace owns a huge mansion, which is very impressive because apparently he's only 11 years old. But he's an excellent at cooking and baking. He's an absolute wizard in the kitchen. And he's turning 11 years old on his birthday on November 11th. So he decides to throw a costume party for his birthday. So he'll have 10 of his friends, plus Horace, makes 11 guests in total, who will arrive on November 11th, and they'll have a grand feast they will all partake in at exactly 11 a.m., which is the 11th hour. So here are his guests, and not all of them are named. Some of them are just referred to as animals, but most of them are. We have the two twin giraffes who are dressed as angels. One of them is named Cora. The other one doesn't say what her name is. We have Oliver, the pig, who's dressed as an admiral. Thomas, the rhinoceros, is dressed as an astronaut. We have Max, the Bengal tiger, is dressed as a Native American, which, I guess you could say he's a double Indian. We have the swan, who is never named. I don't know why. It just calls her the swan, but she's dressed as a princess. We have Eric, the zebra, that, according to the text, says that he's dressed as a punk, I guess. Alexandra, the cat, is dressed as an Egyptian queen. Sam, the judge, is dressed as a crocodile. And finally, we have Kilroy, the mouse, who is dressed as a musketeer, or you could say a mouseketeer. So here they are, all arriving at the gates of Horace's mansion. And so Horace leads them into the banquet hall and shows them his absolute gorgeous feast, his mouth-watering set of food here that Horace had all made himself. But Horace gives them a very strict instructions. He tells them that they're not allowed to touch a single crumb, not allowed to take a bite of anything until the time of the feast at 11 a.m., until the 11th hour. But fortunately, until that time comes, there are plenty of amenities around the mansion for people to entertain themselves. First, they play a game of musical chairs, with Sam the crocodile playing in British Grenadiers on the piano, which, that's fun until, Thomas and Horace destroy all the chairs, but, they had fun. And, by the way, I'm not going to show all 30 pages. I'm just going to, giving the highlights. It's just the most important pieces of information for you to know. So anyway, a few of them play some cards, where Oliver the pig is apparently the genius of the cards. He wins every trick. I don't know exactly what game of cards they're playing, since Max here is playing a joker. I don't know what games involve a joker, but I don't know. But they're playing something. Then a few of them play Blind Man's Bluff. As you can see, Oliver took on the blindfold here. Some of them go outside to play tennis, so that's fun. And, some of them play hide and seek, with Alexandra the cat being the seeker, out in an Egyptian temple that Horace has at his mansion for some reason. But it fits aesthetically with Alexandra's whole outfit, that's for sure. And then we have Thomas the rhinoceros and Eric the zebra both play some game of chess out in the gazebo, which doesn't last very long because neither of them really know how to play chess. And then finally, the waited hour arrives. Finally, we get to 11 o'clock. Everybody piles back into the banquet hall, and what do they see? The feast is gone. Consumed to the last crumb. One of them is a thief. One of Horace's guests has stolen the feast and eaten it before the appointed time. So they all start questioning each other. They all start throwing out accusations. And they all come up with their own excuses, their own alibis to say why they shouldn't be considered sus. Kilroy has the best excuse. He says, I'm literally a mouse. I couldn't possibly eat all the food myself, which seems to make sense. But then Horace shows up. He just comes out of the kitchen with a plate of sandwiches and is like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about the food. Apparently, he had a bunch of sandwiches hiding in the kitchen, and so whoever stole the feast apparently didn't think to check the kitchen for the sandwiches. So it's like, we'll will just make up for it. So they all take the sandwiches, they go outside, they have a nice picnic, and Horace reveals the birthday cake, which apparently was also hiding in the kitchen, and they just enjoy themselves, and the book ends. They never find out which one of them stole the feast. But one of them did steal the feast, and that's where things get interesting. Just as it says in the very last line of the last page, it says, "But in the end, although the thief was someone they all knew, they never found out who it was that stole the feast. Can you?" So as I said before, you can read this book from cover to cover, and you would only get half the story. Because if we just go back to the very beginning, you find that there's a lot of interesting clues that go beneath the surface here, that tells its own story. But first, when you look at this illustration, the first thing you might notice is that there are all these words along the pencils on the side at the edge of the page. And if you read these words going clockwise around the page, it spells out a message. It says, "Drawing conclusions from sketchy clues may lead you astray, so sharpen your eyes and your wits. Get the point?" Yeah. But if you look even closer, you notice that there's another message, because all of the pencils have letters on them. So it's a little bit subtler. And if you read these letters, again going clockwise around the page, you would find that this spells out another message. It says, "It was not Max." So if we were to believe these messages, we should conclude that our double Indian friend, the Bengal tiger Max, is not a suspect. We can eliminate him. But if you look even closer, you might discover something else. Horace, on his bulletin board, has one of the illustrations that appear later in the book, specifically the hide-and-seek game. That's kind of weird. What's that doing there? So, it turns out that these kind of hidden messages are found all over the book. Like on every single page has these kind of hidden messages. And at some point, they get pretty crazy. How subtle or convoluted some of these hidden messages get. But in this particular page, it's pretty simple. Now we find these letters on the iron gate at the entrance. And if you read these letters from left to right, then they spell out, "Watch the clocks." So time is going to be very important in this story. We have to keep in mind what the time is at every point. And I believe it's hard to see here, but the clock on this page is on Eric's motorcycle, which says like around 7:30 a.m., I think. So I won't be highlighting all the clocks that we see, but just keep in mind that every illustration will have messages, and they will also all the illustrations will show us the time as well. So then we have the feast. Where do we think these messages are? If you really want to, you could pause as whenever I open to a new page so that you can try to point the message yourself before I point it out. But in this particular illustration, we start with these plates along the edge of the page. And if you read this message going counterclockwise around, it spells out, "Can you find a hidden message in every illustration?" So, not all of them are going to give us earth-shattering revelations, but it's an interesting message. Now next, you might have noticed that these two banners behind us have letters on them. And sure enough, if you take the letters of each banner and arrange them by color, so we have the blue letters, the red letters, the white letters, and the black letters, then they spell out multiple messages. On the left side, it says observation, deduction, do not guess, and tick. And so now we do the same thing on the right side banner and arrange the letters by color, and we get these messages. Now you see it, watch the clocks, look carefully, and talk, as purple letters, white, red, and black. So that's pretty interesting. So then we have the musical chairs. Where do we think is the message this time? Well, it's almost hard. It's probably invisible on this resolution, but you'd have to look really carefully. At the very bottom of the page are these teeny tiny little letters that's read from right to left. And so I kind of arranged them in a different order for our benefit. And and this time the message spells out, Sam is not the one you seek. So Sam the crocodile, who's playing on the piano, is eliminated from our list of suspects. But you probably already noticed that we have a very suspicious part of this page, which is the notes at the top of the page. Now, this music at the top of the page is, unsurprisingly, British Grenadiers.
Some talk of Alexander and some of Hercules.
It is, in fact, the song which the actual text of the story says Sam is playing. But if you look a little bit closer, you notice something interesting. All of these lower notes don't really fit what we expect to be the tune of British Grenadiers. And if you isolate those notes and separate them out, you find that it makes a different tune. And this other tune actually is Three Blind Mice. Now that's very interesting. It's not an accusation, but it's an interesting piece of evidence. Then we have the card game. Where do we think is the message this time? Well, the first thing you might notice is that our admiral here, Oliver, has an interesting strategy for how to win at cards, which is cheating. Because there's this mirror behind Eric's head, which is revealing what his cards are. But this draws our attention to Eric's hand, which leads us to the next clue. Since we have this mirror behind Eric, we can see both sides of his cards. And it turns out that the back of his cards has these letters on them, and the letters that spell out CODE, or code. So we know that there's some kind of cipher going on here. And in fact, this tells us that the letters on one side of the card correspond to the actual faces of the card on the other side. So we know that C is the 3 of hearts, 4 is So we know that C is the 3 of hearts, D is the 4 of hearts, E is the 5 of hearts, which are the 3 sequential letters of the alphabet, and O is the 2 of clubs. Now there are 52 cards in a deck, and there are 26 letters in the alphabet, which means that you need exactly 2 suits. That's right, because each suit is 13 cards, so with 2 suits, you can represent every letter of the alphabet. And that's what we have here. We have the suit of hearts, which represents the letters from A to N, and the clubs represent the letters from N to Z. So now that we have that piece of information, what do we find? At the top of the page is a bunch of cards. And yes, this is the message encoded in the card cipher that we've just established. And so if you use this key of the hearts as the first half of the alphabet and the clubs as the second half of the alphabet, you can translate this message as, the pig is a cheat, but not a thief. So Oliver isn't innocent, but he isn't the thief we're looking for. And also you can use the same cipher to translate other cards on the page. On the left side it says tick, and on the right side it says talk. So time is still important. And we see that the time in right now is it is 8:55 a.m. And on top of that, there are a couple more messages in the same page that I haven't even pointed out yet. And they're not very important to the story, but I just want to mention that they are even crazier than that, of like how well hidden these messages are, or that they get absolutely bonkers. But I'll just leave that as an exercise for you. So then we come to the blind man's bluff. Now at this point, it should be pretty obvious where the message is this time, because we've got all of this Morse code along the side and into the page. You might have even noticed it on the first time we went through here. And so if you translate this from Morse code, you get this poem. The two giraffes are innocent, entirely free of blame, which leaves us with the mystery of Cora's sister's name. So you remember that the twin giraffes, which are apparently not our thieves, one of them is named Cora, but the text of the story never tells us what the name of her sister is. And so that leaves us with an extra mystery. Now when we translate the Morse code at the bottom of the page, it leaves us with this message. The answer to this extra riddle lies near Piggy in the middle. All right. And yeah, and just like before, the Morse code on either side of the text spells out tick and talk again. All right. So if we look at Piggy in the middle, we find there's this bingo board. And it's pretty straightforward how to translate these numbers, because it's just a matter of 1 is A, 2 is B, 3 is C, all the way up to 25 is Y, and technically 26 is Z, but they never use that in this message. And there's a 0 in there, which is supposed to be like a period, basically. So if we translate it that way, we get this message. Karnak holds in shadowy silence the secret you are looking for. Go ye and seek it. And you notice that I colored some of these letters in pink because some of the numbers were in pink. And so if we take out just those letters and rearrange them, we get the name Clarice. So yeah, Cora's sister's name is named Clarice. So we have that mystery solved. But what's interesting about this message is that it references Karnak, which, as we know, is a temple in ancient Egypt. And you'll probably also notice that the dump truck down there says Luxor, which is another reference to ancient Egypt. So that also kind of points us back to the hide and seek game that is coming up, which we also saw depicted in Horace's study. And there's also like this extra message, which is just isolating the letters on the left side column of the bingo board, but I'm not going to go into that. You can figure that out yourself. So then we have the tennis match. Where do we think is the message this time? Well, an amateur sleuth might think that there's something about the letters on the tennis balls, but actually, if you read them from left to right, it spells out red herring. So it's actually nothing. The real message here is actually in the bushes. Yeah, these roots in the bushes are letters which are upside down, so I flipped them over for our benefit. And it says, watch the windows. So previously we were watching the clocks, but now we're watching the windows. Which, by the way, the time right now is shown on on Sam's pocket watch, which says it is 10:45 a.m. So now let's start watching the windows. If we look at this window, we can see that we can actually see the banquet hall from here, because we have this big centerpiece in the middle, which is the same centerpiece we saw in the banquet. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So then we have the hide and seek game. And this is where things are very interesting, because we've seen clues pointing to this scene twice, in Horace's study and in the blind man's bluff. Well, it turns out that the message here is pretty straightforward. It's actual phonetic hieroglyphs. Or it's as close to phonetic hieroglyphs as Graham Base can make it. Actually, if you look at the hieroglyphs on the left and right side of the page, he spells out the whole alphabet from A to Z. So that's just a clue, just in case you don't know hieroglyphics. You can just figure it out with that. But anyway, these cartouches at the top of the page translate to Alexandra is not guilty. So again, if we're believing these messages, Alexandra is eliminated from our list of suspects. And on that note, the next hieroglyphics at the bottom of the page say, put no trust in hidden codes and messages. So that's a little bit mixed signals there. And then the next message says, writing in hieroglyphics is driving me nuts, which is kind of funny. And yes, sure enough, we got tick and tock are again spelled out in hieroglyphics on either side of the text. And we can see the clock near Alexandra's head there say the time is currently 10:44 a.m. But then the really important hieroglyphics is actually in the middle of the page itself, not at the outside of the page, but inside the page itself on those Egyptian columns. Because these hieroglyphics translate to, seek and ye shall not find. So that's very interesting. It's a very important clue, because this is the point. This moment right here is the point when time that we've been keeping track of up to this point becomes important. If you look at this page, if you seek, right, you'll notice that every character of the story is present on this page except one person. One person is missing right now. One person doesn't have their whereabouts accounted for at this specific point in time. And we have to keep in mind that you can see in the background that the tennis match and the chess game are both happening concurrent to this, right? All three of these games are happening at the same time. So this is where things really come to a head. So now we have the chess game. And yes, so the time that we see in the clock at the top of the gazebo there says that it's now 10:50 a.m. So that's important to know. But where do we think the hidden message is this time? You probably noticed that at the archway at the top of the page there says musculus domesticus, which is Latin. It is also a scientific name. It's using the sort of modern Latin. And this is specifically the biological designation of a specific species of mouse. Okay. Again, interesting. no accusations. It just happens to be what it says in the archway. But the next clue is also interesting. On either side of the text, we have it doesn't say tick and talk this time. It says this key, the key to a cipher. Because each letter of the alphabet here is associated with a shape, like an angular shape or like a part of that tic-tac-toe board. And it's also associated with a color, either black or white. And where we can apply this key is the side of this chessboard here. Because we see the side of the chessboard has these shapes and colors on them. And so if we use the key to translate the side of the chessboard, we get the message, Eric is not the thief. So, if we believe these messages, then Eric the zebra here is innocent. Oh, and by the way, on a lark, I put their chess arrangement onto chess.org to see who's winning the game. And we don't know whose turn it is. Well, I guess we can assume that it's Eric's because he's about to make the move. But whoever turn it is has a huge advantage. And the reason why is because both of their queens are just sitting out in the open and could easily be taken by the other player. I mean, the text says that they don't really understand how to play chess, so I guess it seems fair that they're both bad at it. But anyway, let's go back to watching the windows. And we see this very interesting point, because we can see the feast from here. We've established this earlier. But now the centerpiece is gone, or rather, it's been knocked over. So this is the point. This is the exact point in time when the feast was stolen, or, consumed. And that's very important to keep in mind. So now we get back to the banquet hall. And you might imagine, and you would be correct, that the hidden messages here are basically the same places as they were last time. But they've changed. They have new messages. So we look at the plates on the side, again reading from counterclockwise. It comes up with this nice message. Goodness gracious, how audacious. Somebody was most voracious. All right. So then we have the banners have messages again, which I find hilarious, just imagining that you came back to the banquet hall and the banners are different now, as like somebody changed them. But anyway, this time the messages aren't in one or the other. They have the same text. It continues from one banner to the other banner. And we arrange them by blue letters, red letters, there's white letters, and the black letters. And so these translate to, there is always a shortcut. Those who choose the longer road shall reap the reward, with 2 exclamation points. Now you don't, and tick-tock. Of course, time is only slightly relevant now because obviously, as you can see in the clock above Horace, it is as the stroke of 11 o'clock. And it's also kind of funny that it says, now you don't. If you remember back to the previous time we were in the banquet hall, the right side banner said, now you see it, and now you don't. So then we have the accusations. Now at this point, there's not that many messages left. But the one message on this page is very significant for analysis. Because we have at the bottom of the page, beneath the text of the story, this mirror writing. So it's flipped from right to left. I flipped it around for our benefit. And so this translates into this 6-line poem. Now hearken every would-be sleuth, of tender years or long in tooth, the ancient sage, the keenest youth, with manners fine or poise uncouth. Yea, all who seek take heed forsooth, for everyone has told the truth. Now, what's very interesting about this is this means that all of the alibis, all of the excuses that the guests make in this particular scene are true, but they may not all be the whole truth, but just means that they are true. And so I sort of extracted out what the text of the story itself says that their alibis are. If Eric the zebra, it wasn't I, by all my stripes I'd rather die. Max the tiger, it wasn't me, I have too much integrity. Cora and Clarice, as we know her name now, it wasn't us, we wouldn't dare cause such a fuss. Kilroy the mouse, I'm far too small, one mouse could never eat it all. Oliver the pig, it doesn't say what his actual words are, but it says that he denies all guilt. Thomas the rhinoceros, I've known our host for years and years, and though my appetite is large, I must deny this dreadful charge. Alexandra the cat, your theories are to no avail. We cats do not steal others' food. It's wicked, bad, and very rude. Sam the crocodile, I too deny, although I have no alibi. All blame for this horrendous crime, he babbles on for quite some time. I'm not the kind of crocodile to fake a tear or force a smile. My countenance is plain to read. My friends, I did not do this deed. Now the two people did not give any alibi. Horace is not here. He's not in this scene. He's off in the kitchen getting the sandwiches. I mean, who is going to accuse Horace of eating his own feast anyway? But also the swan doesn't defend herself. The swan, who has no name, she gives accusations to other people, but nobody actually questions her. So then we have the sandwiches, and the first and most obvious answer here, message here, is the words of the archway here. It says, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first, which is a pretty nice statement. You'd probably expect to see this on the archway of a house like this, because it comes from the Bible. It's in the King James Version specifically of Matthew 19, chapter 19, verse 30, as well as other similar passages in the Synoptic Gospels. But it's also a clue. It's a clue to be able to translate these messages at the bottom of the page. So if we follow this clue, we make the first letter last and the last letter first, or we switch around the first and last letters of each word, it spells out, don't be mistaken, don't be misled, trust not in messages, just use your head. So it's kind of nice. Doesn't really tell us a whole lot, but it's an interesting message. And then finally we have the sandwiches. And at this point, the most convoluted stuff is behind us. There's not a whole lot going on here. All we have is just this message at the bottom of the page, which is not encoded at all. It's just differently spaced. And if you change the spaces around, you get the message. The thief was someone they all knew. And that's the same words that says in the text of the story. But it's very important to establish because there's no trick here. There's no murder on the Orient Express situation. The thief is one of the people in this picture, right? Someone among Horace or his guests is the thief. We don't have a third party that snuck in. We don't have a trick question. And one of these people did it. So now we've reached the end of the story. The question remains, who stole the feast? And I think with all of the evidence that we've collected so far, you probably have your own theory. And please, maybe you can pause right now and place your bets. Just write down in the comments who you think is the culprit at this stage. Now, as I said before, in 1993, the book was re-released with the puzzle solutions added to the end. And sure enough, at the end of the 1993 edition, you will find this solution in a Caesar cipher. Well, it's not really a Caesar cipher. I think it's called an auto key cipher, which means that a Caesar cipher, you just take the letters of the alphabet and they're rearranged to match other letters of the alphabet. Auto key means that you just shift the letters of the alphabet. So you just have one number that tells you how many letters are shifted, or you have one letter as the key that says, like, this is A, and then the next letter corresponds to B, and so forth. It's not particularly secure because you could just exhaustively, as a brute force your way through by checking like all 26 letters of the alphabet. But that's neither here nor there, because this is a children's book. We're not making it that complicated. So it turns out if you use the letter K as the key, then you can translate this message. Drumroll, please. And we have. Congratulations! It was indeed Kilroy the Mouse who stole the feast. But he had help. 111 of Kilroy's furry relatives hid themselves in the house and around the garden, and at 11 minutes to 11, they all scampered into the banquet hall with Kilroy and ate up all of Horace's beautiful food. And now, just to show how clever you are, can you find 111 mice hidden in the pictures? Happy hunting! So we have the answer, that it was Kilroy, our mouseketeer, the whole time. And he was telling the truth. He said one mouse could never eat it all, but that's why he had a lot of help. And it also confirms the time that we have been looking at the whole time, and that the feast was stolen at 11 minutes to 11, which is 10:49 a.m. But we're left with New Game Plus, because in all of the pictures that I just showed you, every one of them has some of these hidden mice in the illustrations. And if you saw any of them, congratulations to you, because they are really hard. They're really subtle. A lot more subtle than the hidden messages we've been looking at. And some pages have a lot, some pages have few, and they eventually, over 30 pages, they add up to 111 mice. So I tell you this book was going to get crazy, and it certainly does. But it was such a wild ride, and such a fascinating one too. And I think that even though it's simple enough that it can be grasped by a child's mind, I think that what's really inspiring is how much it really stretches your mind to find things and to crack these codes and to crack the mystery. Is what's very impressive for a children's book, that it actually kind of provokes and challenges a young developing mind to figure these things out, which I think is really important for any kind of children's media. But anyway, with all that said, if I ever decide to do something silly like this again, then tune in next time when I explain to you why this book, this Sesame Street book, is a masterclass in horror fiction. Thank you.